So, for people that are listening, not everybody knows who you are. So if you could just introduce yourself and how many years you've been married and why, because it was yourself that actually decided to do this interview. Yeah. So okay. I'll leave it for you.
Okay. So my name's Jayne, and I'm married to David, who pastors Vision Church, and I've been married nearly 34 years. It's been quite an adventure. Can't believe I've been married 34 years. We've got 7 children, which was part of the adventure. 9 grandchildren, which is making it even more of an adventure. And I often pray for the young girls who are hoping to get married, and for the married couples, the Lord will bless their marriages. And just when I was in prayer one time recently, I felt the Lord saying it would be really good to do something where people can ask questions about marriage. Because I wish when I was younger, I had something like that where I could quite freely, just ask anything so that I would know what to expect. But also so when I was in marriage, that I could have perhaps asked, what do I do in this situation, So I think it's good to have that openness. I'd like Vision Church to be like that, where people feel they can approach me or anyone else who is in a position to answer questions on marriage. So I just felt the Lord laying it on my heart to do it. And I thought, well, a good way to do it would be question and answers, because then folk can actually put questions in. Yeah. I can then prayerfully look over them, hopefully give a wise answer. But just to say, I'm not perfect. Every marriage goes through different things. There might be some things I say today you think, you sure about that? And I would encourage you, if there is anything that you think, just like Abby said there, that then gives you another question in your mind, feel free to put that in, or even speak to me privately. Yeah. There's nothing that I will not want you to talk to me about, no matter how silly it might seem, no matter how intimate you might think it is, and you think, oh, I can't ask Jayne that. Honestly, be open. We live in a society today where there is a lot of openness about wrong sex and wrong relationships. So please feel free to ask me anything.
And I can personally say, as a married woman of, 9 years nearly, I've come to you with a lot of questions.
And Abby doesn't hold back.
I don't hold back. No, I just come out with all sorts. So, and you are very good to speak to. So we'll go ahead and start with the questions. So we got all the questions in, and what we've done is we've split them up into, because they're all kind of different categories of questions. So we actually have 21 questions to get through, and as you can imagine, they're not all straightforward answers. So I don't know if we'll get through them all. We'll see how we go. We'll go till 12:30 and see what happens. So the first question, in fact, there's a bit of they'll be up here so you can all see them. These are 2 questions that are very similar. So how active should I be in finding a husband, or is it something I leave completely up to God? And then on top of that one, also, what advice would you give to single women looking to get married in the future?
Okay. So, well, first of all, I would see yourself as in a special season before you get married. That's a season of life which will never repeat itself.
Yeah, that's true.
That's a season of life where you only need to think about what you're doing that day, where you're going to go with yourself that day, what time you're going to spend with the Lord. As soon as you're married, you need to immediately think about, well, what does my husband want to do today? Have I spent time with him? When children come along, obviously it gets even more complicated, because they really do demand your time and attention. So I know it's a hard season, because I remember it well myself. I longed to meet the man of my dreams. And there is a sort of, sometimes it's an unrealistic thinking of, as soon as I meet this guy, I will be completely fulfilled and my life will be perfect. Now, I would say to you, you're going to marry a sinner. So get that out your head right away, okay? there is something very special about marriage. It's wonderful, and I would definitely marry again. So I'm not in any way taking away for how wonderful marriage is. When I say I'd marry again, what I mean is the same guy. In case you think I've got plans. But it is a special time. I remember the years leading up to me meeting David. I would spend a lot of time just going away and praying. I would really involve myself in things to do with the church, getting involved in ministry. I worked with the Young Covenanters, the children's work. I threw myself into things like that, evangelism, anything I could be involved in, I was there. Don't be idle. If you're just sitting at home and you're just watching movies all the time, or you're flicking through Netflix and you're on the computer all the time, you're not feeding your soul, and you're going to become very discontent. And then the things that you don't have will become idols to you, and you'll start to think, if I just had this, and God's not satisfying me in this area. So I would really encourage you, just be content as you can in the season you're in. Now, as regards looking for a husband, I actually made a faith list of what I wanted in a husband. Now, be realistic, obviously, you know. He's absolutely stunning, he's got a six-pack and he's a millionaire, and, you know, the Lord might not actually answer that, but maybe he will. But I would, you know, have a real clear idea of what you're looking for in a husband. And it's not wrong, you know, to write down that list. I even put in my list a musical person.
Oh, really?
And I got a musical person.
There you go, yeah.
I'm pretty sure I put a leader, and David is, he's a leader. Somebody who loves children. David loves children. I did see a guy with dark hair. Oops.
Yeah.
But the Lord obviously thought, no.
You're getting a ginger.
You're getting a ginger. So honestly, I would really do things like that, but in a sense of being active in pursuing a relationship. Well, when it comes to anything else in life, like a job, a house, any of these things, you don't just sit there and wait for it to happen.
Yeah.
There is a sense of being actively looking and thinking, right, okay, where can I go that I might meet somebody? But the most important thing is prayerfulness, you know, really be submitted to the Lord in wanting to find the right person. If you become too impatient, you might settle for somebody that's just not right.
Yeah.
So be patient, and it'll be worth it in the long run.
Yeah.
Yes, but I would say don't just sit there waiting for the Lord to land the guy on your lap, you know. Because it might just not happen, you know, and it might be a bit heavy for your lap, so you've got to be careful, you know. But no, definitely be active to a point, but prayerfulness. And yeah, ask the Lord very specifically, this is what I really would love to see in this man. These are the qualities I'm looking for. And keep your eye open for that guy coming in or bumping into him somewhere.
I think you're right about the being single. There is a tremendous loneliness at times.
It can be, yeah.
And I think you're spot on about when you say keeping yourself busy is so important, because if you are just sitting at home, that loneliness is only just going to grow and grow and grow. And surround yourself with godly people.
Yep.
You know,
Absolutely.
godly women, really, you know, married women even, you know, so they can give you advice on what marriage is all about.
Definitely, yeah.
So moving on, that's a fantastic answer to that question. So we've got there is number 3 here, but I think that's repeated actually in number 1 there, so I'll just go to number 4.
Okay.
Is it possible for a Christian to choose the wrong partner after satisfying all the parameters of Scripture?
Okay. So obviously, if you are finding, I'm assuming this person is meaning, you know, that you marry somebody in the Lord. You're not going to marry somebody who's a non-Christian, because in that situation, light and darkness is just going to give you all sorts of issues. If you love the Lord and then you marry somebody who doesn't love the Lord, they won't understand your love for the Lord. They won't understand your desires. So it's a very, even from a common sense point of view, you can see why the Scriptures say don't be unequally yoked with an unbeliever. Yeah. So I'm assuming this person's asking, you've satisfied that side of things, so can you then still marry the wrong person? Now, we've got to remember God's sovereign, so if you've married within the Scriptures, then God will work with that. Yeah. But what I would also say to you is, it's not just not marrying an unbeliever. I would prayerfully ask different questions before you. Well, you can't ask them before you start to have a relationship, perhaps, but once you're getting into a serious relationship with somebody, I would be asking very pertinent questions and looking for certain things, qualities in that person. For example, I would be asking, so if it's not obvious, maybe you're already in the same church, but if you're not, you'd need to ask things like, so if we were to commit long term, what church would we attend? Which church do you think we'd end up going to? Because that's very important. You don't want to end up in different churches. That would be horrendous. So things like that, and that could be something for you that is very important, because you might think, oh, I don't want to leave the church I'm in, but he may feel equally the same way. So these are things you'd need to really be prayerful about. Do you want children? I mean, it might shock you, but there are some people who don't want children. Even Christians who are like, oh, no, if I do, it'll be one, you know. Whereas the other person might be thinking, oh, I'd love lots of kids, you know. So it's important you talk about things like that. Education, even looking into the future. Are you somebody that's passionate about Christian education? Maybe your husband-to-be might be like, oh no, I would never want you to homeschool. Maybe you are very passionate about something like that. So again, things like that are good to discuss in advance, where you will live, because sometimes people can feel very close to their family, and I've seen this happen. It's a big factor in deciding where people live. Sometimes a girl's like, I can't stay away from my family, I need to be close to them. It seems to be a common thing for girls that they like to be quite close to family. Guys, maybe not quite so much, sometimes they are. But again, it's important to know, right, is this going to be an issue? Do we have are we both agreed where we'd like to live, you know, things like that. And any other expectations. But another thing I think is important, now it might affect girls nowadays as well, but I think it is still very much more guys. I would at some point in your relationship, when you're getting very serious, find out, is your husband involved, or your husband to be involved in pornography? If he is, I wouldn't marry him until he deals with that. Because you are going to have huge issues in your relationship going forward. And even if he admits he is, but he says, well, but I'll stop it when we get married. No. That's not going to happen. Okay, it's like an alcoholic saying he's going to stop drinking. It's not going to happen. He needs help. He needs counselling. So I would look into that and ask an honest question of your husband-to-be, because it's a huge issue for a lot of guys. A lot of them will have dabbled in pornography, but there's a difference between that and somebody who's continuing in that and who hasn't felt convicted enough as a Christian to say, no, I need to get out of this. So that's another thing I would definitely talk to them about. So unless you find out certain things, you could have a lot of issues going on into your marriage. So these are things, I think, just common sense issues that I would speak to your husband-to-be about before you actually commit.
I think there's a point in the relationship when you do first meet that really clouds your judgment, because you're so infatuated by this person. And it's fantastic that you've brought these questions to ask your husband-to-be, because I wouldn't have even thought about these things. I maybe would have thought about where we would live, but things like pornography, things like, even the education one, children, I mean, some people just assume my husband will want children, and then they go into the marriage and then he turns around and says, no, I don't want kids, what made you think I wanted kids, and then that's, so it's you're absolutely right, these questions are fantastic, and try not to get too caught up with.
I mean, don't ask them all in the first night.
the first meal.
Sit with your list,
tick.
Tick, okay. But no, definitely throughout the relationship, before you commit, I would ask some pertinent questions that are important to you.
Fantastic.
Forum you've got.
Nah, maybe leave that aside.
Ask him a question when he's ready to hear.
Absolutely, that's exactly.
So here we go. So let's move on to number 5.
Okay.
What boundaries would you say are essential for young couples while dating?
Okay, this is an interesting one. I've actually got a few things written down
Yeah,
for this.
this is a loaded question, isn't it? Really?
Okay, well, one of the things I've said here initially is trying to control sexual passion is like trying to put a forest fire out with a fire extinguisher. Now, that's a good
okay.
Saying. Not everybody has the same level of sexual passion in them.
Most people.
Your average couple.
Yeah.
But the scripture says better to marry than to be burned like a forest
Absolutely. A lot of couples will struggle sexually, and I think this is something that, again, isn't addressed enough, you know, in the world, especially nowadays. It doesn't matter, they don't care. So it's even more important in the Christian church that we talk about these things. So the advice I would certainly give you is flee youthful lust. That's why the scriptures say flee, because it knows this is not something you can mess about with. It's not something you can say, oh, well, we'll go so far and then we'll stop, because it's not going to work like that. You might stop, but you will have gone too far. You will have gone further than you wanted to. And then you'll feel convicted, and it affects obviously how you feel spiritually, and you feel guilt. And all, yes, of course, we come to the Lord and we're forgiven, but because it can be an ongoing thing, it can really pull you down spiritually. So you're better to think again about this beforehand rather than be burnt and then think, oh, that was too much, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
Sex is one of the most wonderful gifts of God, but it can also be one of the most destructive sins because of its consequences, because of what it does to you emotionally. So plan ahead. I would advise, hold on, wait a second. I would advise you to avoid certain things. For example, staying up late together when everybody else is going to bed. If you're in a house, and I mean it might not apply to everybody this because maybe you're in a flat of your own or whatever, you're not with parents around, but if you're in a home with parents in the house, I would not stay up together in that home when they've gone to bed.
Yeah.
I would even say to your parents, can you hold us accountable? Can you tell us, right, you need to go now, we're going to bed, whatever. Because that, for me personally, I know that was an issue for us. Because you just start to get cosy and close, and it's lethal, absolutely lethal.
Yeah.
Cars can be beds on wheels. Cars can be beds on wheels, Francis. Do you agree?
Cars. I'm saying nothing.
So I'll leave your imagination to think that one through. But we all know couples go away in cars, find somewhere quiet, and yes, steamed up windows can be a problem.
Yes, it's true.
Be careful you don't
So
give
be
innocent people ideas.
warned in advance that it's not clever
No.
to again go off away somewhere late at night. During the day, fair enough, but at night time where you can find somewhere secluded and quiet, be wise. Think to yourself, look, let's not get in that situation in the first place, you know.
Don't play with fire.
No, exactly. Try to date where there are other people around. So when you're going to go out together, you want to have alone time, but try to be in places where you know somebody can just walk in, or there's other people in the vicinity, because then you're obviously less likely to get into a situation that you find yourself struggling to get out of. And also, it's good to make yourself accountable to somebody. So say you've got a sister or a close friend, or just somebody that you know can say to you, look, how are you finding things, how are you getting on, are you struggling with that side of things, so that they can draw you out.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can sort of just pretend everything's all right, and if somebody draws you out, it makes you face up to, actually, no, you're right, we are struggling. So, and then they can be like, well, you need to stop, you know, and they'll help you to think it through, you know. So making yourself accountable is good. But I also want to say, though, please, because I know this again has been an issue in the Christian church, if you do slip up, it's not the unpardonable sin.
No.
Because I know in the past couples daring say, oh, we've struggled with this, because they're so afraid then of that condemnation of, oh, that's it, Yes, it's sin, of course it's sin, and of course it needs to be dealt with in the sense that you must get it right before God and you must take steps to change. But it's not a sin that means you cannot then walk close to the Lord, you cannot then be involved in anything, or it's a sin that needs dealt with and then left at the cross and you go on.
Yeah.
But don't feel you cannot confess that sin, to somebody and get help with it. Because you need help.
Yeah, absolutely.
In order to stop, you need help, So I don't know if that fully answers it. I hope it does.
Yeah, just on side note for that, I think you're right with when you do sexually slip up and sin, it's a very, as a couple, it becomes such a burden when you can't talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
And you feel like you're in a vicious cycle where you're not speaking to anybody about it, and every time you're with your boyfriend, you're kind of in this cycle of falling into it again and falling into it again, and then just feeling guilty. And when you do come to a sister in Christ or whoever it is, and you do let go and just talk about it, it really, really helps massively. But on a side note, just another question that I just thought of there. If two people are really struggling sexually and they have been with each other for quite a while, would you encourage them to get married quickly? Yeah,
it's a good question. I think as long as they're absolutely sure they're meant to be for each other, I would encourage them to marry as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Because why not?
Yeah.
If they're sitting back waiting, we need to save more money for our mortgage, or we need this or that, I would say, look, forget all that. Rent somewhere, go somewhere cheap, whatever. But the important thing is that you stop sinning.
Yeah.
That's more important than worrying about getting a nicer house or whatever else, But you must make sure you're marrying the right person. It's not a case of, well, we're struggling so we get married and maybe you end up regretting it for the rest of your life because you think, okay, we're satisfied sexually now, but we've got nothing in common, you know?
Yeah.
Because sex is only one part of that relationship. So that's where I say go back to asking all these other questions. How compatible are you in other areas, And if you don't feel that you are going to marry this person, it might be an idea to even separate for a while and say, look, this relationship's not going in a good direction. Should we step back and even put it on hold for a few months and see where it takes us then? So that might be.
And would you advise that they should have, I know it's just them two that are involved in the relationship, but they should have other people sort of involved in the sense they're looking on and they can say, I don't think this relationship's healthy, having other people that they trust.
Be humble enough to be accountable. Now, I wouldn't be accountable to just everybody and anybody because people have all sorts of opinions on things. You use your wisdom. Look for either an older couple who you know are wise and who have been through a lot maybe themselves and can really speak into your situation, or another younger couple who you can really trust, who will be honest with you, or parents, or it's just somebody you know will say the truth to you.
Yeah.
And if they, even if you don't want to hear it, if they say, honestly, I am concerned, I don't think this person's good for you. I'm seeing cracks in their personality, I'm seeing future difficulties, really take that on board.
Yeah.
Whether you there and then break off the relationship, that's a different matter, but do not commit if people who you really look up to spiritually are showing concern, because they love you and they're seeing things that they genuinely are worried about, so I would seriously take that on board.
Fab. Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So moving on to number 6, here we go.
Yeah, this is good.
Do married couples usually have sex on their wedding night?
Okay, so
it's an interesting
I would say absolutely yes.
Especially if you're Christians.
I think
can't wait for the wedding night.
I think your husband, if he's been waiting all this time, might be a bit kind of like, what? You're not in the mood? Now, to be fair, because at first when I saw that question, I thought, whoa, really? And then I thought, but hold on a minute. The reality is, for some girls, there could be a situation where she happens to be on her period.
Yeah.
You know, and she's like, oh no, it's on my wedding and I'm going to be on my period. And I know of a situation where we actually prayed about that for somebody, and praise God, it worked out. Yeah. So out with illness, you know, obviously a girl being on her monthly cycle. But the other thing is, which can be an issue for some people, there can be a fear. If somebody's not been sexually active before, and maybe more for a girl than a guy, but maybe some guys, there can be a sense of like, oh, I don't know what to do, what's going to be the expectation of my spouse, you know, how they're going to feel. And so there could be a wee bit of that going on. But yes, you should, when you get married, expect to have sexual relations on your wedding night. Yes, definitely. And you should prepare yourself for that, leading up to that. Again, this is where being open with people and talking to people and saying, how did you find it? People at one time would never have discussed that. But it's so important because it can be tricky. Just try to see if there's another question or whether there's a...
no, I think that's just for that one.
I know there was some more information about that, but that comes next probably.
Yeah, go for it,
Is there an element of, not sexually, but like, see how people are so determined obviously not to fall into sexual sin before they're married, but like if you were like to completely hold yourself away from that person, even just anything physically, even like hugging or anything like that, to like go too far the other way, so that when it comes to when you've kind of built up a fear of it physically.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think if you're very comfortable with each other in every other sense, that'll just naturally happen. I mean, there is a wee element of, because I can remember when I get married, having this sense of like, whoa, we're allowed to do it now. Suddenly. Just like one moment it's like, no, the next moment it's like, yeah, do it as much as you like. And that was quite a sort of like, whoa moment for me, because it was kind of like getting used to that idea that actually you could. And there was no shame in it, and there was nothing to worry about, and you know, you didn't have to feel, oh no. So yeah, but that wasn't something that would obviously hold us back in any way. It was just a sense of like change, you know, which you had to get used to, which was lovely though. Yeah, so I wouldn't worry about that. I definitely wouldn't.
Can I say regarding something that you said? I was brought up a Catholic, and we were taught this is a necessary evil within marriage. And it's only for procrastination for children.
For children,
So I was thinking, and we didn't the first night.
Really, because of that. So there you go. So sometimes because of a fear or a sense of this is not a right thing to do. And fun enough you saying that, I was listening to a podcast, Mark and Grace Driscoll. And he said they had done a marriage event and they had 3 different couples come up to them. There's a huge amount of people there, but the 3 different couples come up to them and actually say, are we allowed to consummate our marriage? And they'd been married for months.
Oh wow.
But they had been in a church which had told them sex is evil.
Wow.
And it's only like that for having children, and basically, it's a necessity. So because maybe they weren't thinking of having kids at that time, they'd been holding back. And I mean, Mark Driscoll basically said, get out of here now, go and consummate your marriage.
I know.
Because he was like, what? All these months. And so to us that seems really foreign, because I think, my goodness, you know. But the reality is that is the case for some people. So yes, definitely, and we can get on to that with other questions, sex is not just for having babies, and it's not evil.
When going back to Joanna's question, see the when you're not physical with your boyfriend leading up to, you know, him becoming your husband, is there a sense, could you know, how do you know that you're going to have that spark, basically? So, you know, if you're not kissing him, hugging him, you know, physically involved with him, obviously within the parameters of the Bible, but how do you know there's going to be that spark, or do you just trust the Lord? Yeah,
you just trust. I mean, unless there's an actual physical issue there, the natural thing will be to follow and to becoming more passionate.
And as long as you find them actually attractive.
Absolutely, I'll say that. There's got to be, it's not enough just to say, oh, I got on great with this person spiritually. and we have got lots in common. If you do not feel you want to kiss that person, feel you want to embrace that person, feel you would love to get involved with that person physically, then there's alarm bells.
Yeah.
You are not going to react well on your wedding night. You're going to be like, oh, I'm happy to sit and have a prayer time with you, but I don't want to do that. No. So no, there's got to be the physical attraction.
Yeah.
But if the physical attraction's there and you're both healthy and all things being equal, it will automatically lead on to everything else. And you've got a whole life of adventure to find out all about each other and everything, which will go into another question that gets asked actually.
So we'll move on to if we'll move on to number 7 here. Is sex really tricky and awkward to figure out? And I'm assuming they mean, obviously, this is someone that's never had sex before. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So on their wedding night, is it very awkward and tricky to figure out? Absolutely.
And really, we've kind of more or less answered that. Yes, it can be, especially I think for girls, it can be quite uncomfortable if they've never had sex before. But remember, you're now together for the rest of your lives. So even if in the first night it's all very like awkward and like, oh, I don't know what that's for, or can't do this, or I don't know, if I like that, or whatever, you're learning about each other. And this is, I think, one of the lovely things about Christian marriage. You are starting an adventure together. It's not about that first night you've both known everything. Now you might have been involved before with other people, but for couples who have not been, I remember when we first got married, it was like a progressive thing over time that our sex life became better and better and better. It was very fumbly at first, and it was very like, oh, okay, because you didn't know what to expect. Yeah. But that's not wrong. No. And that's not something to worry about. Just like anything in life, you learn and you discover more about each other. And to the horror of my children, I often say sex gets better as you get older, because you know each other better. That's true though, yeah. And you know what's better. Exactly.
Apparently.
Not a man.
Yeah.
More when they're younger, but women seem to be.
Yeah. So you discover more about each other. I look at the faces here, it's like, moving on.
Well, it's true though, because, sorry, Joanna, on you go.
Sorry, I was just going to say, would you think it's vital for a girl or a guy in that sense, before the wedding night, to understand how to actually have sex?
Yeah, I think it's very important that you
talk about it.
Either talk about it with other friends who are married, or find out, how did you guys find it, how did you go on? So if you've got another couple, for example, who are quite young and they've been married before you, it's good to chat with them and ask them, how did you get on, Yes, be prepared, because you could get into a situation where you're like, oh man,
what do I even do?
Yeah. So I'm assuming that you at least know what's involved in the sex act. And then there's a whole load of other questions which I'm sure will come up, but how far can you go and what can you do and everything. But you're on an adventure together.
Just off that, sorry. Should you talk to your fiancé about what to expect on that night?
I think you can do it, but you've just got to be careful. Putting thoughts into each other's heads and
because I think it's important
setting each other off
to have expectations and like to talk, because there are some girls that obviously, as you said, are very, very uncomfortable, and maybe there's been past trauma there, or they're just really not very open in that way. And I think having that conversation with your fiancé before you get married.
For years, your dad and I passed out a book to young couples.
That's right, I remember that. Yeah, I do. I think we got it.
Yeah. And the amazing thing is, when I read the book and I'd been married a good number of years, I learned things from the book I didn't even know.
Wow.
There you go. I know. Well, on that note, actually, the podcast I've been listening to is Mark and Grace Driscoll, and it's Real Marriage, it's called, and they are very good. So you can get it as a book, or you can get it as an audio book, or on a podcast.
I've listened to them, they're
very,
very
honest,
good.
very
excellent.
Open. And sorry, I was just going to say something about what you were saying there, before you get married. Oh yeah, the trauma side of things. Yeah, I mean, this is something which actually, just to throw it in there, but if you have been through some trauma in the past, either in a previous relationship where the person's been quite abusive to you, especially sexually, but even abusive in any way to make you feel that you struggle to relate to a man and really trust a man, or if you've been through any kind of abuse as a child, you must confide in your husband to be about that, because you can almost guarantee that will come into your marriage.
Yeah.
As soon as you go into trying to relate sexually, and maybe even in other areas of trust, you will then struggle. So I would really advise strongly, if there's been any trauma in the past, to please speak to your husband to be about it, and get counselling if you have to on that area, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache in the future, because you can be healed, especially by the Lord's grace and strength as well. But also your husband then will know how to relate to you differently, because you both will need counselled in that. So that's really important, just to throw in there.
And should you be open and honest about your sexual past, even if it's not traumatic?
Yes.
But if you've been with several partners before,
absolutely. I mean, you don't need to go into
honest.
details, but I would definitely, if your husband thinks, especially if he thinks you haven't been with anyone before, you need to be honest and upfront and say, look, I have, you know. If you've had multiple sexual partners, you be honest and say, well, before I was a Christian or whatever, I did sleep around. You don't need to go into detail, you don't need to say how much and how long and whatever else, just telling him that there has been that, and equally he should do the same with yourself.
Fab, okay, that's great. So let's go on to question number 8. How many times a week would you recommend having sex while married?
Oh, about 5 times a day, maybe.
Alright, I don't think so. 5 times a day.
Oh no, sorry, I just had to do that. It's so funny, because when I got that question, I was thinking, that is so interesting, because that is exactly the kind of question I would have asked on me back. So how many times a week do you do it?
And I think there's married couples that have been married for years that still
would like to know how many times other couples do it.
You know, on average, how many times should you be doing it a week?
Now, no doubt, if you got all the stats together, there would be an average amount that would come up. But the fact is, every couple is different. Every couple's different. Every guy's different. Every girl's different. And then as a couple, they will have... Now, they're different for all sorts of reasons. Their sex drive can be different. Their circumstances can be different. It depends a lot on what season of life you're in. If you've just had a baby, for example, the last thing you're going to feel like is jumping into bed and having sex.
Here.
So, your husband needs to understand there's going to be a time of healing there, and if you're not feeling well, times of the month. It's so important, though, that both of you are satisfied. That's the thing.
Yeah, it's important.
And that you have an understanding. Very quickly in your marriage, you will find out what is the expectation on both parts. Now, when you first get married, there'll no doubt be an initial, oh, this is all new, wow, you know. So that's why they have what you call your honeymoon and things, because that's, you can go on honeymoon and just, that's what you can focus on. The reality of life kicks in, you both go back to work, or a baby comes along, or just life comes along, and you don't have the time to constantly be having sex, you don't have the energy to constantly be having sex. But this is where the dilemma can come in a little bit sometimes, because maybe, now, I would say probably usually guys want sex more than girls, but it's not always the case. But that would probably be your kind of norm. Guys are a lot more, apparently guys think about sex practically every minute of the day. They can be out and about working and then sex is in their head, you know. It's just the way guys are, it's the way they're made up. Girls can be like, take it or leave it sometimes, you know. I'm too tired. Yes, I love having sex, but I could give it a miss tonight, you know. Whereas a guy would be like, oh my goodness, you know. So you do need to try to find that balance with each other as to what is acceptable to both of you. But just hold on, because I think I had quite a bit to say on this one.
It's quite a big question.
Hold on. Because I don't want to miss anything, because I think it is a really important one So men and women relate to sex very differently. This is important as well because women tend, once the adventure of honeymoon's over and you now know what it's all about and you're satisfied and you're like, right. But as life progresses, a woman tends to need to feel loved to relate to her husband sexually. So if her husband's been quite dismissive of her through the day and not been helpful towards her, maybe been quite arrogant towards her, maybe rude towards her, she will struggle to relate sexually that night. But for men, this is where you see the sin cycle coming in at times. For men to feel loved, they need sex.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's good.
So it's like a vicious circle with sin sometimes, because the woman's like, well, I don't feel like having sex because I don't feel you've loved me today. And the guy's like, well, I don't feel loved because you're not giving me sex. So you can end up with this kind of like, tension. And this all goes back again to the whole sin issue between couples. But this is where, if you're first and foremost submitted to the Lord in your marriage, He is your head. Your husband's your head, but He's your head. You will come to the Lord and say, right, Lord, even if my husband's not been everything he should be today, help me to love him with your love. Help me not to be unforgiving and hold that again. Now, I'm not talking about your husband's been absolutely horrendous towards you, but maybe you asked him to unload the dishwasher and didn't bother, or maybe he's not been as helpful with the kids as he should have been, and you're like, So I would say be very careful of weaponising sex.
Oh yeah, definitely.
To say, well, he's not getting sex tonight.
Yeah.
Because that can be a common issue.
Well, it's tempting, isn't it?
It's because you know you can hurt him through that. You know that he gets frustrated through that. So it can be so easy for you just to be like, turn away, I've got a headache, sorry. You often see jokes about things like that, the wife saying she's got a headache, But it's a sad reality that can be what goes on in marriage. So I would say, yes, within reason, not if your husband's been abusive towards you, but if it's just that you're feeling a bit like, prayerfully come to the Lord and say, Lord, help me to love my husband. Because again, it's bringing the love of Christ into everything, isn't it? Does the Lord only love us when we do everything we should do?
That's true. Yeah.
He doesn't. He loves us beyond that, doesn't he? He loves us even when we haven't done what we should have done, and he doesn't reject us. So I would be very careful if you can tell your husband needs to be sexually satisfied. I would, even if you're saying to yourself, I would submit yourself to him in that. And this is where I think submitting to each other comes in. Because sometimes you might just say to yourself, right, okay, my preference would be no tonight, but no. And you might think you end up enjoying it anyway, which you probably will. But women sometimes have that wee hurdle to go over because we're very much more emotional, whereas guys are just like, whatever, whenever, wherever,
So there's loads of questions coming in from the audience here.
Absolutely.
So I've got, so in that, when your husband needs to be sexually satisfied, but perhaps you're ill or you're heavily pregnant or you've just had a baby, or even there's times of you're kind of estranged from each other, you're quite there's arguments happening, there's things like that, and your husband's got a high sex drive. How do you deal with that? I know you've said that if he is needing it, you give him it, but is there an element of there comes a point where maybe you need to have a conversation with him where he needs to show a bit of self-control?
Absolutely.
And it's navigating that together alone, because I think there are times where perhaps you might need counselling from another couple in that, because I think this is a situation that most married couples end up facing some point in their marriage, where the husband, and usually the husband's like, I'm not getting it enough. The woman's like, well, I don't want to give you it because you're this and that, or maybe she's ill, or so how would you navigate a conversation with your husband about that?
So I'll choose your timing well. Never try to speak to your husband when he's tired or when he's just been,
That's very true. I think you're absolutely spot on there.
There tends to sometimes be in marriage situations where if you're both very busy and there are these issues going on, you try to grab a moment where you're like, right, I need to tell him this and I need to talk to him about this. And then it all comes out, but it all comes out wrong. Choose your moments. Now, I know this maybe sounds a bit crazy, but one of the best moments to speak to your husband is either after you've had sex or maybe the next day when he's in a good frame of mind because you've had a lovely time together. But make sure it's at a time where you've not got kids running in and out, or you've not got phone calls happening all the time. Try and choose a time where maybe the kids are either down for a nap or they're in bed at night, or he's finished his work and there's not all sorts going on. And I know that's not always easy, but you need to try and find a time where you're both calm. And I would say, look, address it. Just be straight up, be honest. One of the things I find with men is that they appreciate you just being straight to the point.
That's true.
As females, we tend to be all emotional, go all around the houses and you just don't love me. Whereas they would much prefer you just to be straight to the point.
Yeah.
Look, I know you need more sex. I know that it's really getting to you, but I am really struggling because I'm exhausted. You're not helping me enough. You're not doing this or that. You're frustrating me. So how can we work this out? Now, hopefully as a couple you can actually sit down and come up with a plan where, this is where I think it's so important that couples have time so they can just get time together.
Yeah.
Even if you've got kids, try and get a babysitter. Go out for a night.
A date.
You do need date nights. Now, I'm not one of these people that's like, you must have a date night every week. That's not always going to happen. But you should try to aim for that. Try to get, whether it's in the house, they're getting a takeaway, and the kids are in bed, or getting somebody to look after the kids. You go out for the night and then they stay over with somebody, or they're in their bed when you come home, so that you can relax together. Now, when you're on that date night, don't bring up all the rubbish. That is a no-no. I've done it.
That's interesting.
My husband and I have gone out for the day somewhere, and I've thought,
this is a great time
to tell him all the things I'm struggling with. And it's just created a horrible atmosphere, and we've ended up falling out, and the whole thing's gone up in the air. Now that was probably quite a number of years back, that kind of thing used to happen, because you learn and you think, that was not clever. So when you're going to talk about stuff like you were saying there, when you're talking about issues, try to find a calm time, not when you're on a date, but where you're in the house together, where there's no interruptions hopefully, and you just address it and you sit down and you actually talk. Now, if he refuses to do that, if he's like, I don't want to talk about it, that is where you would maybe need to say, well, look, if we can't sit and talk about this, I need to speak to somebody. Now, husbands do not like the idea of you speaking to somebody else.
No.
So that will immediately make them think, oh, right, better talk. So hopefully that won't happen. But if you really do feel they're not going to sit down with you and talk, then you do need to suggest, well, maybe we need to speak to somebody else, or I'll need to confide in someone else, because we need to deal with this.
That's great.
Sorry, I thought you were going to say something.
Fab, right, okay, that's fantastic. So just, there's 2 more questions coming. I think it's good that we deal with these ones since the people are actually here. So here's a very interesting one. I don't know if you'd need to go away and think about this before you answer it, but is it wrong to have sex on your period?
Oh, interesting.
Yuck.
Yeah. Is it actually wrong? I mean, if you go back in the Old Testament laws, they would say yes, but we don't follow the Old Testament laws on a lot of things. I would just say, number one, if you really want to do it, well, be prepared for a lot of mess. But you would both need to want to do that. If your husband's like, well, I just need to have sex tonight, and you're like, I'm on my period. If there's something wrong with him, if he's like, well, too bad, I still want it. So you both need to be very much in agreement. But I would say if you're having regular sexual relations, there shouldn't really need to be that situation. But then again, every situation, some women bleed for 2 weeks. You know? It's not always as simple as, well, you only bleed for 2 or 3 days of the month, and then... So some people do have ongoing issues there, so they're like, what do we do?
And there are some women that actually their sex drive is a bit higher on their periods.
On their period?
Yeah, which is, I mean, I'm not one of those women, but I know there are women that are like that.
So if she's game,
Yeah.
Just make sure you put a towel down, that's all I would say.
That's true. It's true.
Make sure you
But this is
Put a towel down.
yeah, because I bet this is what we're dealing with, you know.
Yeah.
So there are people out there that would, there are women that would actually be game for it on their period. Now I can't enter into that myself. But
I mean, there's no reason hygienically where you could say it was completely wrong.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to do you any great harm.
No.
But it just probably wouldn't be people's preference.
Yeah. But you would say there's nothing wrong with it
if you're both mutually
wanted.
agreed and you're happy to do it. I can't say from the scriptures that there's any reason to say no.
Okay. Good. Okay. Oh, jings. Right. So here we go. Last one here. On well, I'm saying that this is just the last one from people.
This section.
How do you move? Now this is a very good question. How do you move from having lustful sex to spiritual sex? Because I think at the beginning of your marriage, it can be very lustful at first, unless you're one of these couples that are extremely focused on the Lord, you know, which is a fantastic way to be. But there is
Solomon to each other all through the sex.
basically, quoting Song of Solomon. But there is, I know, and even myself, Christian couples that go into marriage thinking, oh great, now we can just go wild, and that can turn into a lot of lustful sex, a lot of some people even like quite aggressive sex, you know, and it's how you navigate that to, instead of, because God created sex obviously to be spiritual, and it's how you get to you know, get spiritual.
Well, I would kind of say it's not so much how do you get there. I would say if you're having sex and you're being quite adventurous or whatever, if at the end of that you can't pray together, there's something wrong.
That's good. Yeah.
Now, I'm not going to start telling people what you can and can't do in your sex life, because I do think people should be adventurous and should, you know, because you're married for a long time and people can get bored with each other, you know. And you hear women saying, oh, I actually heard, it's so sad, I heard a young woman once saying to me, I watched the telly while he's getting on with her.
Oh dear.
And I just thought, that is so sad.
That's really sad.
Know, because that is not a real relationship, you know. She was clearly getting nothing.
There's no intimacy there at all,
So that is not the way your sex life should be. They should both be enjoying it, and you should be finding ways to make it more pleasurable for each other. But if you know for sure you're sinning, even in marriage, now that might be by bringing pornography in. Now I would say to watch pornography while you're having sex, it's got to be wrong.
Totally wrong, yeah.
Just like you wouldn't sit and watch a sex scene in a movie together out with sex. You don't watch people sinning on the screen while you're having sex. That doesn't make sense, you know. Do you do role play when you're having sex? That's up to you. But if you think you're sinning in it, you've got to then ask, right, is this healthy for us, you know? So if you, now I'm not saying you should pray every time after you've had sex, but if you couldn't pray with your husband after you've had sex, I would say ask yourself what's going on there.
Yeah,
you know,
it's a very good way of looking at it, yeah.
And never do anything you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
Because your husband might have ideas of, oh, I fancy trying this, I fancy trying that, and you might be like, oh no. Or you might be like that, and he's like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because sometimes women can be wild as well. Don't.
It's true. Okay.
Don't do anything you're not comfortable with, you know. Be honest and say, I don't want to do that.
No.
And there's ways of doing that without shoving the guy off and saying, where you go, you know. But just like, no, just direct in a different way. But yeah, you've got to find again for what is right for you both.
So when you are, obviously, I mean, there is a question that we're coming up to that might help with this, but when we're nearly,
Yeah, we can always...
we have part two. When you are intimate with each other, it can be quite difficult to know how far can you go with certain things. And I think when you were saying about, you know, whatever you're comfortable with, and if you can pray with your husband afterwards, and that's okay. But I think God's given you a conscience. He's given each and every single one of us a conscience, hasn't he? And I think Paul says it in the scriptures where not everything is helpful.
Yeah.
you know, but
Yes, that's right.
I don't know how you word it.
Permissible,
Yeah.
but it might not be helpful.
Yeah, that's exactly it, yeah.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, things are permissible, but maybe they're not helpful to you as a person.
That's right.
And I think that's really important, that if in your conscience you're just like, I don't feel comfortable about this, but then maybe other married couples are doing that thing and they feel great about it.
Yeah.
You know, you should listen to that conscience within you, because that's God given.
Personal.
And and if you're uncomfortable with that, then you shouldn't, you know, move forward with that. But yeah, I think that praying with your husband afterwards is a fantastic way to understand.
That will immediately give you a sense of, have we sinned? Because if you sin, you don't feel like praying then, and you won't feel close.
Yeah.
There should be a tremendous closeness after you've had sexual relations, which is something I think when people are sleeping around, they just don't get probably at all. I mean, I can't relate to that, but I can only imagine that they don't, because it's just like once it's over, it's kind of like, all right, okay.
Yeah.
What's his name?
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, that kind of way, it's just crazy. But with your husband, there should be a beautiful closeness,
a oneness,
because you have one flesh.
Yeah.
Because that's more than just a physical thing, it's a spiritual thing as well. And then,
perfect.
if that's not there, there's something amiss.
Fab, right, okay, so here we go. Well, this is the question that I was thinking of, which is number 9 in regards to what are you comfortable with in marriage and what is the guidelines. So number 9 is, what guidelines does the scripture provide for the physical relationship in marriage? So what guidelines does the Bible give you for having sex? You know, and how far do you go with certain things?
And the Song of Solomon's quite incredible, because if you really study it in depth, there's a lot of people who believe that it permits a lot. And also there's people go down the route of saying, like Francis was saying earlier, that sex is only for having children and it's not really something to enjoy. Clearly that's not true, because there's clear scriptures that talks about, even in the New Testament, where it says your bodies are not your own. You know, you're not to neglect each other. Now, that's nothing to do with having kids. That's about you having pleasure and you enjoying each other's bodies, and you saying that, like, I need you tonight, and I need you know, or I need you to fulfill my sexual desires, and you shouldn't withhold from each other. You know, Song of Solomon gives you a wee insight into probably some of the sexual act. But it's all done very poetically, so there is a bit of like, oh, does it really mean that, or does it really? So there are people who will say, I mean, it speaks about them having sex outside, and you know, things like that, where folk are like, what? But at the end of the day, again, it's about, what are you comfortable with? Are you doing anything with your body that you think, oh, I feel really disgusted with myself now, or I feel really undignified, or I feel used, or I feel like, say your husband's just treating you like a prostitute or something like that. Well, don't let him do that. You're not a prostitute, you know? So I would have a dignity about you as a woman, and if you think for a minute that your husband's treating you in any way as if you're lesser than him, or
more like an object than his wife.
But equally, women can do the same with a guy.
You're
I
right,
mean, sadly, the way we are today, I mean, this is what's happening with feminism on the rise, and this kind of idea of, well, you're just there for me, you know. But one thing I would say to you, though, is because we are sinners, there can be in our nature a desire to do things we shouldn't do.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So remember that, be cautious of that, because even although it feels good, it might be sin. So just be aware of that, because obviously pornography makes guys and girls feel great if they're watching it at the time, but then it leaves a foul taste in their mouth, as it were, afterwards, because it's just this unclean feeling, this horrible feeling of worthlessness as well.
Especially for women, I think, because pornography is just, I mean, we're already battling so much body image issues, and even also performing in the bedroom as well. I mean, pornography is just creates so this fantasy for men, and it can be awful. It can be so bad in a relationship, so destructive. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I don't know if so does that answer that? Well, I was just going to say, in Proverbs also talks about, for men, you know, rejoice in the wife of your youth, let her breast satisfy you. So that's a satisfying thing. It's not just there, breasts are not just there to feed your babies. And so clearly, you're meant to have your sexual parts are there to satisfy each other, to enjoy. It's not just for procreation.
Yeah.
And again, this is where we're at today as a society. We need to remember that within marriage, sex is to be really enjoyed, really explored, really adventurous if you want it to be. It should not be boring.
Yeah. Okay. Would you say that you shouldn't study Song of Solomon until you're married because it is so sexual? Like, when you study it, because I know it's poetic on the outside, but if you really in-depthly study it, I mean, there's oral sex in there. There's so many different kinds of having sex in there.
I think you'd have to ask yourself, why are you wanting to study it?
It's true.
If you're doing it as I doubt anybody would study it as a theological degree, like I'm going to...
Unless you were preaching on it, but...
I'm going to do my dissertation on the Songs of Solomon. I don't think so. But there's no need to, is there really? But if you are leading up to marriage and you want to kind of know, well, what's kind of permissible, and fair enough, Song of Solomon does give you a real insight.
Okay, that's fine.
Things.
Brilliant. Okay, so, right, we'll end with this question because we've only got 5 minutes, right? And this is only on question number 10, so we're definitely going to have a part 2. What do I do if my husband has an addiction to pornography?
Yes.
After marriage.
This is like after you're married, so...
I mean, obviously I had sort of said beforehand, it's a good question to ask before you get married, try to find out. Hopefully they'll be honest with you. But if you discover when you are married, you suddenly discover something on the computer or a phone, or you're like, oh my goodness, Now, first of all, be very cautious. Don't go flying in with accusations to your husband. You need to make sure you know for sure that this is going on. But even when you do approach him, again, as I said earlier, men react better to just a straight question rather than you going round the houses,
Yeah.
So I wouldn't go and say, I've just opened up the computer and this is on your history. I would just ask them a straight question. Are you looking at pornography? Now, I would say probably 9 times out of 10, the first reaction the guy's going to give is, no. Like the wee boy with his fingers caught in the
or the hand in the cookie jar,
It's like, no, I didn't, I think you need to just ask a question. Now, they might come clean and go, oh, yes. If they do, great. Because then you can start to address it, and hopefully the fact that they have said yes, they want help. If they don't, and they're like completely in the defensive, no, definitely not, I would leave it at that point and go away, pray, really, really pray, because you need the Lord in this situation. I then leave it maybe for a matter of days or whatever, come back to them. But this time, make sure you have evidence that you can say, I have seen, or if you have physical evidence, but you quite possibly might not have physical evidence in the sense of something you can actually bring up, because the chances are they'll go and delete everything if they know that you're on to them. I would then say to them, look, I have seen this or I've seen that, so I know that it's only me and you that have access. I know I'm not looking at these things, so I believe you are. And again, just be very direct with them. Now, hopefully again, because if they're a believer, their conscience will have been, from the first moment you've mentioned that, their conscience will be saying, you really need to deal with this. Hopefully they will then say, okay. Now, can I just say, do not come with a superior, condemning, I would never do that attitude, because you will just drive a big wedge between you and your husband. He will never talk to you about anything. You need to come with an attitude of, look, I know a lot of guys struggle with this, be honest with you, I'm not coming to you because I'm telling you that's it, or marriage is over or anything. But if we don't deal with this, it could be the end of our marriage. We need to talk about this. If he comes clean, encourage him to either talk to another guy friend who can maybe help him in it, to be accountable to him. I know that some guys do that. They have groups of accountability with each other about things like pornography. let him be open and honest with you to say, look, you can check my computer, you can check my phone anytime. You know, if men are very defensive about you looking at their phone, not that you should, I don't think you should constantly be checking your husband's phone. You should give each other privacy. But if you have drawn to his attention that you know that he's looking at things, if he's genuinely wanting to sort himself, he should then be like, right, from now on, you can check anytime. I am completely going to be accountable. Suggest counselling, because there's a high chance he will struggle to stop. It's such an addictive thing. So if you can then, it might not be in your own church, you might have to go to somebody else, preferably a neutral person, because it can become very personal, this kind of stuff. But he needs to get counselling. Now, if he continues to be adamant, no, I'm not going to speak to anybody, you're talking rubbish, you're lying, well, you really need to come prayerfully to the Lord and say, Lord, you need to draw this out, because this is going to ruin us, you know. And I actually said, I was asking your dad actually about this kind of thing. I says, what do you think? He says it will destroy a marriage. There's no way, there's no other way it will destroy it. And this is why it's so important to find out even before you get married, because if your boyfriend has issues with that, he will take that into marriage. And I know firsthand of a marriage that has completely been destroyed because a young man was addicted to pornography, couldn't face up to it, and sadly their marriage has disintegrated, you know, because it is a form of adultery. And the trust is completely broken, you know. So,
absolutely.
So I'm not saying that's a perfect way, because you're assuming, see, I mean, it could open a whole can of worms. You've got to remember, if you as a wife are completely not giving your husband sex at all, and you're just like, I'm not interested, I'm too tired, now it still doesn't make it right, just like, you know, any other thing in life, it doesn't excuse sin. But if you were to get counselling, the counsellor may well say, well, have you considered that your husband had nowhere else to go? You know, and although it wasn't right, in a sense, you haven't helped the situation, you know. So this is where we've got to also remember, you know, you have committed and promised before God to commit yourself to that husband. Marriage isn't marriage without sex. So if you then are like, I'm not interested anymore, and your husband is going month upon month with no sex, the temptation on him then to just click a button and see it all before his eyes, it's huge, isn't it? You know. Definitely. So that doesn't make you responsible for his sin. I'm not saying that, but you can help him. You know, you can certainly help him, and your marriage is much more likely to end if you're not doing your part either. You know, because that's destructive on both sides, then, isn't it? So is that helpful at all?
And again, I think it comes back to having that conversation before you get married. It's a huge thing, because especially nowadays, a lot of guys, and unfortunately Christian guys, are watching pornography. And I know you've said that you've known of a marriage, and I've also known of a marriage that they actually had that conversation. And he told her, I am addicted to pornography, but she went into this marriage with the mindset of, well, if he's getting sex from me, he won't want that.
That's a sad thing. And I can understand her thinking that. But it's a different kind of sex.
That's what I was going to say. It's a different kind of sex. It's a lustful. It's a very selfish. Very selfish.
Absolutely.
Sex.
That's true.
Yes. So that's great. Okay, so we are at 12:30 now. So
we've kind of got more or less halfway through.
But there was a few questions that came in from the girls here. So we will have part 2. But I'll just stop this recording. Fab. So thank you for listening, and part 2 will be happening next month, and we will let you know when that is happening so that you can join us. But we pray that God blessed you through this interview, and that he can use it for his glory. Amen.